Kelly is not the real name of the new girl at our now defunct day center. The year was 1982. I remember that because Kelly's first day was a few days after Sean had suddenly started attending our day center again. Sean is not the real name of the guy I was in love with at the time. And so I was feeling pretty groovy. That's why I remember a few days later, Kelly started attending, and after our groups were over with until after supper time, Kelly approached me and my gal pal Andrea, that's not her real name either, saying, "You got to come over to my apartment and read this magazine article. It's so good." Andrea and I were, "What is it about?" "It's a surprise. You got to come over and read it. It's so good." So um, Andrea and I didn't have much else to do, and I was feeling so happy about Sean that the long walk would feel like flying, and it was a considerably long walk, but we didn't care. We were young, a lot younger then, remember. And um, all the way along, Kelly was chirping about how good the magazine article was. Kelly was right. Andrea and I both read the magazine article. It was about Elvis Presley. It was written by a Swedish nurse, and she in the 1950s, this nurse was taking care of a little girl in Sweden named Karen, who had a very severe form of cerebral palsy, which caused a great deal of sickness and pain and suffering. And that was her whole world. And um, Ke- Kelly, there's one thing that made Kelly very happy. See, at the time, Elvis Presley was young and very handsome, and at the height of his popularity. And Karen, like many other girls, had a big crush on him. And she especially liked his new hit record, Teddy Bear. And she wanted to write a letter to Elvis Presley. Now, the nurse knew that if she wrote a letter to Elvis Presley, chances were slim to none that he would ever see it, much less answer it, because Elvis was a very busy man in those days. But Karen was so happy, and so the nurse wanted her to feel that way for a while because it was also good for her health. And so Karen went along with the illusion, and they wrote a letter together with the nurse translating from Swedish to English. And they walked to the mailbox together from the facility. I'm not using the phrase they walked literally because Karen was confined to a wheelchair. And they mailed the letter, and Karen was so excited all the way there and all the way back. She was so excited about that letter. And each day they would go to the mailbox together and check and see if any letter arrived. And um, no letter from Elvis. At first, that was not any big deal because they were in Sweden and Elvis was in America, so it would take time for the letter to arrive. But then the weeks passed and the days passed, and when no letter from Elvis, no letter from Elvis, Karen grew sadder and sadder, and more time passed. Each day, no letter from Elvis, and Karen was getting sadder and sadder. And the nurse noticed this, and she was also getting sicker and sicker. So the nurse made the decision that night that the next day, in the overwhelming likelihood that there would be no letter from Elvis, that she would break the news to her so she could muster up, the resiliency that kids had and move on, you know. And so, because, she would be sad about Elvis not answering her letter, but she would be sadder if she was expecting it. But, the nurse went to bed sad. And when they were walking to the mailbox together, Karen noticed that the nurse looked a little sad and asked her if anything was wrong, and the nurse denied it. And they went to the mailbox, and lo and behold, a letter from Elvis. And then 2 days later, the arrival of this big, huge teddy bear, bigger than Karen, from Elvis. And after that, Elvis and Karen wrote letters to each other all the time. They had this friendship, writing letters back and forth between America and Sweden. And the nurse reading the letters to her in Swedish. And Karen was so happy. She thought she felt so special with Elvis writing these letters to her, and the friendship that they had. And about 2 years passed, and Karen was still so happy about the letters that were still coming from none other than Elvis Presley, and she was so happy about their friendship. But the nurse noticed that, in spite of that, her health was getting worse and worse. And uh, and then the nurse was aware that Elvis Presley was very busy on tour, and she was just hoping that another letter from Elvis would come because she didn't think Karen would be around much longer. And sure enough, another letter came, and Karen was so happy. And that night, she went to bed and passed away. And Elvis Presley never told anybody about this for as long as he lived. We only know about this because the nurse came forward with that magazine article that was so good.